So today we're going to talk about how to do well in exams, and the important thing to remember is that the people who do best in GCSEs and A-levels are those who work hard. And you know, in my experience over many years, it's not the most intelligent pupils who do well, it's those who work hard. So you know that if you work hard, you're going to do okay. And I think the other thing to say about motivation is that you should be aiming for the top grades. Always aim for the highest grades, which would be an A star in an English country GCSE or A level. Not your school target grades, but the highest grade. If you work hard, you'll do it. So the first step is to make decent notes, covering the syllabus, notes that you're going to revise from, notes that you're going to keep organised in a file. This is my file of notes on deserts, and let me show you what they look like. My notes. First of all, they've got a hierarchy of headings. There's sort of main heading, subheading, subheadings. The points are numbered. The notes are in note form, which means they're not full sentences. They're an abbreviation of the sentence, and sometimes even an abbreviation of a word. So, you know, a word like development, I would normally write down DEV full stop, because that I know is my shorthand for the word development, or less developed countries, LDCs. Okay, so my notes are organised as a series of headings, and you'll also notice there's a lot of white space, huge amounts of white space here. And you know, file paper doesn't cost a lot of money, and you need this white space because it means you've got space to write things later on, but more particularly it means that the notes form a shape on the page, and that's very important when it comes to learning them, that each set of notes has a distinctive shape on the page. So that's page 1. There's another page with some diagrams, lots of white space, a clear shape on the page. There's another one. Notice the way they're laid out. Now, a couple of other things about notes that so we've said already, you've got a hierarchy of points. You'll use abbreviations. They form a shape on the page. There's plenty of white space. A couple of other things, that it's a good idea to use colour in due course, underlining headings in, you know, red or whatever. It's a good idea to make sure that your notes are organised. Notice how I've got all my notes in a file with these card dividers, each divider being one topic. That's really important. It's also very important that your notes are complete. You're never going to get the grade you need if your notes aren't complete. And so if you have missed work, then you need to copy up from someone else the notes that you've missed. Or if your teacher just hasn't got around to teaching you a particular topic yet, or you think it's better explained in the book than as it was explained to you, then make notes, but make sure your notes are complete. If you've been given articles, dense text of some sort, try to reduce them down to notes and then throw away the articles. But get it all into these clear notes, and the aim is simple. You've got to be able to, at the end of the day, write out all those notes. That whole file you're going to write out from memory, and it can be done, and I'm going to tell you in a moment how to do it. Another thing that a lot of students find handy are these revision textbooks. This series, CGP and others similar to it, again, they lay out the work in a very clear form and with diagrams. Some students find that very helpful. I would say use revision textbooks and notes. Notes are most important. Now the next step before we start revising is to know roughly what's going to come up in the exam. So you need to have made yourself familiar with the syllabus, which of course you can always download from the internet, from the relevant exam board. You need to have looked at past papers and have an idea of which topics are always going to be examined, which are options, which subjects come up regularly, which don't, and if you've got any gaps, this is the moment when you'll be able to identify them and fill those gaps by making notes. So now we come on to the revision process. You see, we all in our brains have a short-term memory where we can remember something for, half an hour or a day. But what you need to do is get the notes from the short-term bit of the memory into the long-term memory. And a long-term memory means you can remember, a good proportion of the notes, maybe 60, 70, 80% for 3, 4 or 5 weeks ahead. And this is a hard, tough process. And you're going to need to commit yourself to revising hard. And in the Easter holidays, that may mean 8 hours a day, I would say. 8 hours a day, with breaks every 2 hours, because you can't revise for more than 2 hours without beginning to lose momentum. A break of 30 minutes, let's say, every 2 hours. So I could imagine you revising from 9 until 11 in the morning, and then having a half an hour break, and then revising from 11:30 to 1, let's say, then having an hour's break for lunch, and then revising from 2 till 4, and then a half an hour's break and revising from 4:30 till 6, and then stopping. That would be a good day's work, and many students who are ambitious and wanting to get the top grades will be putting in that amount of time. Now, if you're revising over a longish period, like the Easter holidays, or even the half term before the exams, the summer half term before the exams begin, then you need to have a revision timetable. So for the Easter holidays, the way I would do this is simple enough. You take all your subjects and divide them into topics, and then you look at your holidays and say how many days you've got. Let's say you've got 20 days in the holidays, and you're going to work from 9 until 6 on each of 20 days. And you're going to therefore try and do 4 topics a day. So if you've got 20 days, 4 topics a day, that's 80 topics you can revise in these holidays. That'll just about cover all your exams. And it's a good idea to have that timetable written down, because the aim is to get through all the revision in that Easter holiday. And if you haven't got a revision timetable, then you won't know whether by the end of the holiday you've achieved your ambition or not. You must have a written out revision timetable which is stuck on the wall above your desk at home to guide you. Now, okay, so you've made the notes, you know roughly what's coming up, you've done a revision timetable, you now sit down at your desk, and today we're going to revise this topic. We open our notes, and what do you do next? Well, there are 2 great secrets really to revision. The first is that you need to do something active. It's no good just reading the notes or looking at them in a vague sort of way. You have to do something to drive them into the long-term memory. And what a lot of people do is they make notes from the notes. And it's the process of writing down that helps to drive it into the long-term memory. That's very important. Secondly, you need to test yourself. So you need to maybe make notes from the notes, close the whole lot, and then see whether you can write them out. So this will be for the 3rd time. See whether you can write them out from memory. And it's the process of recalling the information that tends to cement it into the long-term memory. You cannot revise if you don't test yourself. So you make every effort to remember it, and then you write it out, see what you've forgotten. Let's take a very simple example, and that's French vocab. Here we are, you've got 300 or 400 words to learn. You've got them in front of you on a bit of paper. Well, what you have to do is, the only way you can revise those really is by testing yourself and noting the ones that you haven't got, and keeping going until you've mastered all 400. Now, the second big tip really about revision and committing your work to the long-term memory, and that is that you have to repeat it time and time again. And that all the research shows that if you're trying to learn, let's say, a poem, it's much better to spend 20 minutes on that poem on each of 3 days than just 1 hour on one day, because it's the coming back to the work, the poem in this case, again and again, that tends to cement it into the long-term memory. So you need to be going over your notes at least 4 times, I would say, before you get to the exam. So you could imagine if you've got a summer exam, you might well do revision right through the Easter holidays, so that's once. Then you'll do it again in the first part of the summer term, probably with your teachers as you're preparing for the exams, so that's 2. Thirdly, during the half term, the summer half term, just before the exams, that's 3. And then fourthly, the day or the night before the exam itself, 4 times. That's the minimum. And it is the coming back to the work and the testing of yourself to see whether you've remembered it that really, really counts. Now, most of what I've said so far probably doesn't apply in quite the same way to maths, because you can't sit down at a maths textbook and make notes and learn them. No, with maths the answer is to do practice questions. So you need a textbook or handouts that have got practice questions, ideally with model answers, so you can do the practice question and see, if necessary, where you went wrong. And in fact, doing practice papers and then referring to model answers is a brilliant way of revising. And that's what you should be doing at school throughout much of the summer term before exams that start in late May or early June. And incidentally, you need to practice writing at length. So if you've got exam papers that last 2 or 3 hours, you need to have regular practice at writing for 2 or 3 hours, so when it comes to the exam itself, it doesn't come as a nasty shock. So that's how you revise. And then during the exam period itself, all I can say is don't work late at night, eat well and rest well, stop revision at least 30 minutes before your normal bedtime. In the exam itself, there are 2 vital areas where you can go wrong. The first is timing. You've got to make sure that you time your answers very, very well. So to take the simplest possible example, if you had a 3-hour exam with 4 essays in it, you would spend 3/4 of an hour on each of those essays. And it would be a disaster to spend an hour on your so-called best answer, maybe the first one you do, because that would leave you with a maximum of half an hour for what could be your worst answer, the one you might choose to do last. When in fact you need at least 3/4 of an hour for your weakest answer, because you need a bit more thinking time. It is essential to finish the paper, and you're only going to finish the paper if you've worked out the timing accurately. So in the exam itself, you're going to take in a watch, and you're going to, before you do anything, work out, if the exam starts at 9 o'clock, you've got to finish section 1 by 10 o'clock, you've got to finish section 2 by 10:30 or whatever it might be. Very, very determined, driven decision to stick to the times that you've worked out in advance. And the second thing about exams is you have to answer the question that's been set directly. So that if you, to take an example that many of you will be familiar with, if the question says describe something, that's quite different from a question which says explain something. Describe means describe a diagram. You just simply describe, with reference to the diagram, what it's showing. Explain means explain the reasons for the patterns, for example, that are shown in a diagram. So answering the question set directly is important, really important. And I would say that, if you've got a particularly long question, an essay question, the first thing you do is you underline all the key words and you think hard about what this question is aiming at before you put pen to paper, otherwise you're wasting your time. Because in an exam, irrelevant material always scores 0. So that's it. The extra effort for exams is always worthwhile, and in my experience, students who miss a grade always miss by just a few marks. So that's the thing which drives you on, the knowledge that that bit of extra effort from you is going to gain you those few extra marks. Good luck.